what I want to focus on, in addition to the broad human rights story, is a specific issue relating to freedom of expression, freedom of information, and the regime's current attempts at curtailing those rights. I think it's been alluded to by my esteemed colleagues here that the regime's records on things like women's rights, labor rights, rights for religious and ethnic minorities, the LGBT community, are all violated on a systemic basis. But press freedoms, freedoms of artistic expression, and internet freedom, an abysmal record exists in those regards as well. I think that this past year has seen some positive developments and real successes in terms of highlighting the regime's record on human rights. I think most importantly, we've seen the creation of the body of the UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in Iran, a position ably filled by Dr. Ahmed Shahid. I think unfortunately, but expectedly, the regime has denied him access to the country, and it has done all that it can to stifle his reporting. Along with the Special Rapporteur, there's the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva, and we've seen constructive roles played by Canada and the EU in denouncing the Iranian regime's human rights record in a variety of international arenas. This is particularly important at a moment in which the so-called Green Movement has been thoroughly repressed and quashed by the regime effectively in the wake of the fraudulent 2009 presidential elections. I think that this past year offers hope as well. Events from Tunisia to Egypt to Burma demonstrate that opportunities do exist for pro-democratic forces to succeed given the right set of circumstances. One clear way that foreign governments and outsiders can be of assistance here is in helping networks of civil society activists, human rights advocates, and pro-democracy forces communicate with each other more effectively. I think this is particularly important at a moment when the regime is taking increasingly harsh measures to reduce average Iranians' abilities to access information across a range of mediums. This is true from satellite television to cell phone and SMS text messaging and the internet. According to Reporters Without Borders, Iran is currently the leading jailer of web activists and finds itself once again on the list of internet enemies. The last several months have seen the Iranian regime take increasingly aggressive steps towards the establishment of what they've dubbed a halal internet. This past week, a request for information issued by the IT Research Center and the Research Institute for Information and Communication Technology, both institutions affiliated with the regime, have called on Iranian organizations, companies, and universities to submit proposals on censoring what Iranians can access on the internet. This effort, sadly, has been assisted at various points by major international corporations, amongst them Nokia Siemens and the Chinese telecom giant Huawei, both of which only withdrew from Iran in 2011. It should be noted that there are several large Chinese telecoms that are still supplying the Iranian regime with the tools to actively censor, monitor, and track Iranian dissidents. I think first and foremost of concern is censorship. The Open Net initiative indicates that there is pervasive filtering of political and social content at the internet service provider level. As I mentioned, the regime has managed with some success to encourage the development of domestically produced tools to achieve these goals. Because of this pervasive monitoring, organizations like the IRGC, by organizations like the IRGC, self-censorship, I think, should be understood as much of an issue, to be as much of an issue as explicit censorship being pursued by the regime. Internet content producers can be subject to the country's harsh penal code, and this can technically apply to anyone operating even their own blog. Content is heavily filtered, and there's been a particular focus in this filtering activity on human rights organizations and women's rights organizations in the past several years. The Iranian regime also uses its direct control over the architecture of the internet in the country to influence what people have access to. There's a 2006 directive from the Ministry of Communication and Information Technology that bans internet service providers from providing connections faster than 128 kilobytes per second to households and public internet connection points in the country. Most Iranians actually are operating with 56 kilobyte per second connection speeds. This is what you were probably using as 6-year-olds to connect to AOL via a dial-up modem. And given the nature of content on the contemporary internet, this is simply inadequate to give people access to the types of information and type of material that they would likely be engaging with. The intent here is clear. It's to prevent individuals from gaining access to a variety of media that the regime deems to be problematic or threatening. Now when people are arrested of a dissident stripe, getting their passwords to their Facebook account is one of the first things, or other social media accounts is one of the first things that the regime wants to do. This clearly gives them access to networks of individuals that could be deemed suspicious from the perspective of the regime. Several months ago, any individual using an internet cafe in Iran became subject to requirements that they register their use and that those internet cafes turn over logs of use and the nature of that use to authorities when demanded. The regime also focuses on neutralizing encryption, anonymization, and circumvention tools. To the credit of the Obama administration, there has been significant rhetorical and policy emphasis on circumventing the so-called electronic curtain that has descended upon Iran. In December of 2011, the United States opened a virtual embassy for Iran that acts as a clearinghouse for information about travel, educational visas, and as an important tool of public diplomacy. At the heart of this issue is the intense cyber policing that the regime is subjecting its people to. And there are concrete policies that the United States and our European allies can be pursuing to give people better access to the free flow of information in those countries, in Iran. And this is something that the Office of Foreign Assets Control has luckily recognized, and there has been a certain level of carve-outs and exceptions made for specific types of services and software being distributed within Iran that would otherwise be subject to the harsh international sanctions that are currently in place.